Ah, welcome. Warm yourself by the fire. Have a seat or snuggle up in your favorite spot and let me tell you a story. Story 1. My cousins, Kate and Tom Howard, married at Trinity at Easter time and concluded to commence housekeeping by taking one of those delightfully expensive and furnished cottages with which the fashionable seafront abounds, and from whose rear window one might almost take a plunge into the surf, the beach being at the back of the door. They went down quietly early in May, being in a great hurry to try their domestic experiment, and as the evenings were still cold, they spent them about the open fire, spooning. It was upon one of these nights, about 11 o'clock, that they were startled by a noise, as of some small objects falling, soon followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, and then quiet again reigned supreme. At once, Tom, poker in hand, boldly started in search of the burglar, followed by Kate, wildly clutching at his coat tail, and in a state of tremor. They looked upstairs, under the various beds, Kate suggesting that in novels they were always to be found there. The dining room was next explored, where all seemed well, and lastly, the kitchen, where they found what was evidently a solution of the mystery. The burglar had entered by the back door, which was found to be unlocked and slightly ajar. The first excitement subsiding, they returned again to the dining room where Tom, upon closer inspection, then discovered that one of a pair of quaint little pepper pots, wedding gifts, were missing, and other small articles on the sideboard had been slightly disturbed. The next morning, when Kate mildly remonstrated with the queen of the kitchen for her carelessness, she received a shock by being told that it was her usual custom to leave the door open, so that it would be easy and convenient for the milkmaid. They parted with her, and a new maid was engaged, whose chief qualification for the place was that she was most faithful in the discharge of her duties, especially in locking up. While they mourned the loss of the pepper pot, still it seemed so trifling when they thought of that lovely repousse salad bowl, sent by Aunt Julia, which stood nearby, that nothing was said of the loss outside of the family, and the little household settled into its normal state once more of billing and cooing. About a fortnight later, Tom started out one night with an old fisherman, one of the natives, and a local character, to indulge in the delightful pastime so dear to the heart of man, known as eeling. And as the night was dark, the eels were particularly sporty, so that it was well on toward the wee small hours when Tom at last returned to the cottage. He found all excitement within. Kate was in hysterics, and the new maid, also weeping, was industriously applying the camphor bottle to her mistress's nose. The burglar, or ghost as they now decided, the window and doors being found to be securely locked at this time, had been abroad again, but had succeeded in purloining nothing. His royal ghost ship had amused himself, apparently, by simply walking about. Kate cried about the horrible stomping and grinding of unseen boots to Tom. From that time, Kate became nervous and refused to be left alone. Tom started whenever a door creaked, and the treasure departed hurriedly, saying, "Kate, the house is haunted for sure." After that, Kate spent her days in girl hunting and her nights in answering shadowy advertisements that never materialized. They tried Irish, English, Dutch, and a heathen Chinese with a sprinkling of colored ladies to vary the monotony. They seemed about to become famous throughout the length and breadth of the land as the family that changes help once a week when they landed treasure number 2, a baby girl. Shortly after her advent, we were all asked down to help celebrate their happenings, and incidentally to christen the new dinner set. We were not a little surprised at finding Kate so pale and Tom rather distraught. However, after a delightful dinner that should have filled with pleasure the most exciting bride, we adjourned to the piazza, leaving the men to the contemplation of their cigars. We were enthusiastic in our praise of the house and congratulated Kate in securing such a prize, when to our horror, she burst into tears and complained about how dreadful the haunted place was, and then tearfully proceeded with the details until we felt all creepy and suggested the parlor and the lights. It was not until long after that Kate discovered that Tom had also related the ghost story to the men that evening, to which Ned Harris scoffed, and Bob Shaw laughingly told Tom that he shouldn't have such strong drinks at night. About the 1st of July, the climax came. The ghost walked again, this time taking not only the remaining pepper pot, but also a silver salt shaker. Evidently he had a penchant for such small articles. But unlike former times, everything on the sideboard was in the greatest disorder. Aunt Julia's salad bowl was found on the floor, and not far away the cheese dish, with its contents scattered about. This time, one of the windows was found half open. A week later, a note came to me from Kate saying that she and Tom had gone to Saratoga to spend the remainder of the season with her mother. The following spring, Tom received a note and a parcel from Mr. B., the owner of the house, which reads as follows: Dear Mr. Howard, I send you by express 3 articles of silver, which my wife suggests may belong to you, as they are marked with your initials, namely, 2 silver pepper pots and a salt shaker. They were found the other day during the process of spring house cleaning in a rat hole behind the sideboard. I forgot to have the hole stopped up last spring, or to caution you against the water rats. The great fellows will get in, you know. Kind regards to Mrs. Howard. Very truly yours, John B. The next season, the Ghost Club was organized, the badge being a small silver rat bearing proudly aloft a tiny pepper pot. We thoughtfully offered Tom the presidency, but he declined with offended dignity, from the effects of which I think he will never fully recover. Story number 2. Virgil Hoyt is a photographer's assistant up in St. Paul, and a man of a good deal of taste. He has been in search of the picturesque all over the West, and hundreds of miles to the north in Canada, and can speak 3 or 4 Indian dialects, and put a canoe through the rapids. That is to say, he is a man of an adventurous sort, and no dreamer. He can fight well, and shoot well, and swim well enough to put up any winning race with the Indian boys, and he can sit all day in the saddle and not dream about it at night. Wherever he goes, he uses his camera. The world, Hoyt is in the habit of saying to those who sit with him when he smokes his pipe, was created in 6 days to be photographed. Man, and especially women, was made for the same purpose. Clouds are not made to give moisture, nor trees to cast shade. They were created for the photographer. In short, Virgil Hoyt's view of the world is whimsical, and he doesn't like to be bothered with anything disagreeable. This is the reason that he loathes and detests going to a house of mourning to photograph a corpse. The horribly bad taste of it offends him, partly, and partly he is annoyed at having to shoulder, even for a few moments, a part of someone's burden of sorrow. He doesn't like sorrow, and would willingly canoe 500 miles up the cold Canadian rivers to get rid of it. Nevertheless, as assistant photographer, it is often his duty to do this very kind of thing. Not long ago, he was sent for by a rich Jewish family to St. Paul to photograph the mother, who had just died. He was very much put out, but he went. He was taken to the front parlor, where the dead woman lay in her coffin. It was evident that there was some excitement in the household, and that a discussion was going on, but Hoyt wasn't concerned, and so he paid no attention to the matter. The daughter wanted the coffin turned on end, in order that the corpse might face the camera properly. But Hoyt said he could overcome the recumbent attitude and to make it appear that the face was taken in the position it would naturally hold in life, and so they went out and left him alone with the dead. The face was a strong and positive one, such as may often be seen among Jewish matrons. Hoyt regarded it with some admiration, thinking to himself that she was a woman who had been used to having her own way. There was a strand of hair out of place, and he pushed it back from her brow. A bud lifted its head too high from among the roses on her breast and spoiled the contour of the chin, so he broke it off. He remembered seeing these things later, very distinctly, and that his hand touched her bare face 2 or 3 times. Then he took the photographs and left the house. He was very busy at the time, and several days elapsed before he was able to develop the plates. He took them from the bath, in which they had lain with a number of others, and went to work upon them. There were 3 plates, he having taken that number merely as a precaution against any accident. They came up well, but as they developed, he became aware of the existence of something in the photograph which had not been apparent to his eye. The mysterious always came under the head of the disagreeable with him, and was therefore to be banished, so he made only a few prints and put the things away out of sight. He hoped that something would intervene to save him from attempting an explanation, but it is a part of the general perplexity of life that things do not intervene as they ought, and when they ought. So one day, his employer asked him what had become of those photographs. He tried to evade him, but he was futile, and he got out the finished photographs and showed them to him. The other man sat staring at them a long time. "Hoyt," said he at length, "you're a young man, and I suppose you've never seen anything like this before. But I have. Not exactly the same thing, but similar phenomena have come my way a number of times since I went into the business. And I want to tell you, there are things in heaven and earth not dreamt of." "Oh, I know all that nonsense," cried Hoyt angrily. "But when anything happens, I want to know the reason why, and how it was done." "All right," said his employer. "Then you might explain why and how the sun rises." But he humored the younger man sufficiently to examine with him the bath in which the plates were submerged and the plates themselves. All was as it should be, but the mystery was there and could not be done away with. Hoyt hoped against hope that the friends of the dead woman would somehow forget about the photographs. But of course, the wish was unreasonable, and one day the daughter appeared and asked to see the photographs of her mother. "Well, to tell the truth," stammered Hoyt, "those didn't come out as well as we wished." "But let me see them," persisted the lady. "I'd like to look at them anyway." "Well now," said Hoyt, trying to be soothing, as he believed it was always best to be with women. To tell the truth, he was an ignoramus where women were concerned. "I think it would be better if you didn't see them. There are reasons why." He rambled on like this, stupid man that he was, and of course, she said she would see those pictures without any further delay. So poor Hoyt brought them out and placed them in her hand, and then ran for the water pitcher and had to be at the bother of bathing her forehead to keep her from fainting. For what that lady saw was this. Over the face and flowers and the head of the coffin fell a thick veil, the edges of which touched the floor in some places. It covered the features so well that not a hint of them was visible. "There was nothing over Mother's face," cried the lady at length. "Not a thing," acquiesced Hoyt. "I know, because I had occasion to touch her face just before I took the picture. I put some of her hair back from her brow." "What does it mean, then?" asked the lady. "You know better than I. There is no explanation in science. Perhaps there is some in psychology." "Well," said the lady, stammering a little with her color now returning, "Mother was a good woman, but she always wanted to have her own way, and she always had it, too." "Yes?" prodded Hoyt. "And she never would have had her picture taken. She didn't admire herself. She said no one should ever see a picture of her." "So," said Hoyt meditatively. "Well, she's kept her word, hasn't she?" The two stood looking at the picture for a time. Then Hoyt pointed to the open blaze in the grate. "Throw them in," he commanded. "Don't let your father see them. Don't keep them yourself. They wouldn't be good to keep." "That's true enough," said the lady slowly. And she threw them in the fire. Then Virgil Hoyt brought out the plates and broke them before her eyes. And that was the end of it, except that Hoyt sometimes tells the story to those who sit beside him when he lights his pipe. Story number 3. We were in the South Atlantic Ocean, in the latitude of the island of Ferdinando de Noronha, about 40 degrees, 12 minutes south, on board the bark H.G. Johnson, homeward bound from Australia. I was the only passenger, and we had safely rounded Cape Horn with the barometer at 28 degrees, 18 minutes, and yet had somehow miraculously escaped any extremely heavy gale. We had light northerly and easterly winds till we reached 20 degrees, and then the southeast trades were sending us fast on our way to the equator. I sat on deck smoking my pipe with a glorious full moon shedding its bright pathway across the blue waters, and chatting with the first mate, a man some 58 years of age who had followed the seas since he was a boy. For 20 years or more he had been mate or captain, and many and varied were the experiences he could relate. A thorough sailor, and skillful navigator. He was as honest as the day is long, had a heart as big as an ox, and was all round a good fellow and a genial companion. Some of his yarns might be taken with a grain of salt, yet he always positively assured me that he was telling the truth. An account of a voyage that he made in a whaler from the Southern Ocean to New Bedford seemed to me worthy to be repeated. He had rounded Cape Horn 6 times, and the Cape of Good Hope 26 times, besides making many trips across the Western Ocean and to South American ports. I give his account as near as possible to his own words. It was in 71 that I commanded the whaler Mary Jane. We'd been out from home over 3 years, and had on board a full cargo of whale oil, besides 2,000 pounds of whalebone, which was then worth $5 a pound. I always had been fortunate enough to find in a dead whale which we came across a large quantity of ambergris. In our hearts, we were all very light as we began our homeward voyage. Our thoughts all tended to the hearty welcome which we would receive from wives and sweethearts when we reached our journey's end. Many a night, as I lay in my berth, I had thought with great pleasure of the amount of money that would be coming to me from the proceeds of our voyage when we arrived in New Bedford. I calculated that I had made $12,000 as my share of the proceeds from the whale and oil, to say nothing of the ambergris, which I well knew would bring at least $20,000, and 1/2 of which belonged to me. You can therefore imagine that I was well pleased with myself as we went bounding along through the southeast trades. We crossed the equator in longitude 36, and soon after took strong northeast trades, and all was going well as I could wish. We'd put the ship in perfect order, painted her inside and out, and you would never have recognized her as the old whaling ship that she had been 3 years before, plying the Southern Ocean for whales. Never shall I forget an old bull whale that we had tackled about 2 degrees to the south of Cape Horn. But that is another story, which I will give you another time. We had just lost the northeast trades and were entering the Gulf Stream. I sat in my cabin with my chart on the table before me, all rolled up. I had just picked our location on it, and was thinking that in a week or more I should be home, surrounded by those near and dear to me, and relating to them the story of my great fortune. It was always my custom to work up my latitude and longitude about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then after supper, pick off her position on the chart, have a smoke, and perhaps, just before retiring, a nip of grog. And then at 8:30, as regular as a clock, I would turn in. I am a great smoker, and this day I had been smoking all afternoon, besides having had 2 or 3 other nips. We had a dog on board, whom we called Bosun, who had been out with us all voyage, and who was afraid of nothing. He had endeared himself to every man on board, and when Bosun took water, something very serious was in the wind. This night, as I sat in the cabin, I heard a most dismal howl from Bosun, and called out to the mate to know what was the matter with the dog. He replied that he reckoned some of the men had been teasing him, and the occurrence soon passed from my mind. Suddenly, I saw someone coming down the aft companionway into the cabin. I supposed at first it was the mate, and wondered that he had not first spoken to me. But then I noticed that he wore clothes I had never seen on the mate. And as he advanced into the cabin, I saw his face. It was the face of a man I had never seen in my life. He was thin and pale and haggard, and as he advanced, he looked about the cabin and at the rolled-up chart on the table. There seemed to be an appeal in his eye, and then there swept over his face a look of intense disappointment. And before I could move or speak, he had vanished from my sight. Now, I'm a very practical man, and I at once straightened myself in my chair and said to myself, "Well, old man, you have smoked one too many pipes today, or else you've had one drink too much, for you've been asleep in your chair and seen a ghost." I was quite satisfied that I had had a dream, especially as I called to the mate and asked him if he had seen anyone come below. He said no, that he had not left the deck for the last hour, and the man at the wheel, directly in front of the door, was sure no one had entered the cabin. So I convinced myself that I had had a very vivid dream. I could not help thinking of the matter all through the next day. At 8 o'clock the next evening, I sat in the same place, with my work just finished, and the chart lying rolled up on the table before me, when suddenly the dog's dismal howl rang through the ship, and looking up, I saw those same legs down the aft companion. My hair fairly stood on end, and yet today surely I was wide awake. I had only smoked one pipe all day, and had not touched a drop of liquor. The same pale, emaciated figure walked into the cabin, glanced inquiringly and appealingly at me, and again there spread over his face the look of utter disappointment, as if he had sought something and failed to find it, and again he disappeared. I rushed on deck to the mate and told him all I had seen during the last 2 nights, but he made light of it and assured me I had been asleep or smoking too much. He did not like to suggest that I had been drinking. Still, I could see that the thought came into his mind, and it was that the old man had seen him again. I gave up trying to convince him, but requested that the next night, from 8 to 8:30, he should sit with me in the cabin. How the next day passed, I cannot tell. I only know that my thoughts never left that ghostly visitant, and somehow I felt that evening would reveal something to me, and the spell be broken. I made up my mind I would speak to the thing, whatever it was, and I felt a sort of security in the presence of the mate, who was a daring fellow and feared neither man nor the devil. Neither rum nor tobacco passed my lips during the next day, and 8 o'clock found the mate and I sitting in the cabin, and by this time the chart lay open on the table beside us. Just as 8 bells struck, the dog's premonitory wail sounded, and looking up, we both saw the figure descending the cabin stairs. We both seemed frozen to our seats, and the strange weirdness of the whole proceeding cast the same spell over the mate and me alike, and we were both unable to move or speak. Slowly, the figure proceeded into the cabin and glanced around without a word, but with the same expectant look on his face. His form was even more wasted, his cheeks sunken, and his eyes seemed almost out of sight, so deeply were they set in their sockets. As his eye fell on the open chart, a look of supreme joy fairly irradiated his features, and advancing to the table, he placed one long bony finger on the chart, held it for a moment, and then again disappeared from our sight. For 5 minutes after he left us, we sat speechless. Then I managed to say, "What do you think of that, Mr. Morse?" "My God, sir, I don't know. It's beyond me. Then my eyes fell on the open chart, and there, where the finger had been, was a tiny spot of blood, exactly on the point of longitude, 63 degrees west, and latitude, 37 degrees north. We were then only about 50 miles distant from that position, and immediately there came to me the determination to steer the ship there. So I laid her course accordingly, and posted a lookout in the crow's nest. At 5 o'clock in the morning, just as the east began to grow gray, the lookout called out, "Boat on the lee bow!" And as we came up to it, we found 4 men in it, 3 dead, and 1 with just the remnant of life left in him. We sewed the 3 bodies in canvas and buried them in the ocean, and then gave all our attention to restoring life to the poor emaciated frame, which I then recognized was the very man who for 3 successive nights had visited me in my cabin. By judicious and careful nursing, life gradually came back to him, and in 4 days' time he was able to sit up and talk with me in the cabin. It seemed he commanded the ship Promise, and she had taken fire and been destroyed, and all hands had to take to the boats. 10 were in the boats at first, but their food had given out, and one by one he had seen them die, and one by one he had cast the bodies overboard. Finally, he lost consciousness and knew not whether his 3 remaining companions were dead or alive. Then he seemed in a dream to see a ship and tried to go to her for help, but just as he would be going on board of her, something would seem to keep him back. 3 times in his dreams he tried to visit the ship, and the last time there seemed to come to him a certain satisfaction, and he felt that he had succeeded in his object. Turning to my table, he said, "Let me take your chart. I'll show you just where we were." "Stop," said I. "Don't take that chart. It is an old one and all marked over. Mark your position on this new one." He took my pencil and knife and carefully sharpened his pencil. Then taking my dividers, he measured his latitude and longitude and placed a pencil dot at the point on the clean chart. As he lifted his hand, he said, "Oh, excuse me, Captain, I cut my finger in sharpening the pencil and have left a drop of blood on the chart." "Never mind," said I. "Leave it there." And then I produced the old chart, and there, in an exact corresponding place, was the drop of blood left by my ghostly visitor. Then looking steadily into my face, the mate solemnly added, "I can't explain this. Sir, perhaps you can. But I can tell you, on my honor, it is God's own truth that I have told you." If you like these stories, please subscribe, like, and share. And as always, I thank you for listening. The end.